welcome everybody to this Thursday of Escazu. This is our second iteration. My name is Cesarina Aquino. I am from the Institute of Environmental Rights and the president of the Regional Committee of the Caribbean for the IUCN. We'd like to take the opportunity to say that today's theme is the regional panorama overview, as well as access to information, the right to access. Escazu Thursdays are organized by the regional committees of the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and South America, as well as the Committee for Environmental, Economical, and Social Policy, with the backing of the Mexican Regional Office, as well as Central America and the Caribbean, in order to establish the basis in the IUCN to promote initiatives and projects that contribute to achieving the goals of the Escazu Agreement. This series of dialogues have the goal of motivating an exchange of information between the challenges and experiences around the right to information, as well as systematizing the inputs that we have achieved and identify best practices in our work to carry out initiatives and projects in a more effective manner. All sessions will be recorded. We request that your microphones are muted. With the goal of sharing best practices and inputs. We also have a translation system, which you can see in the bottom of your screen, a toggle switch to select the language, if you would like to listen to the simultaneous translation. We mainly have translation from Spanish to English today. We would also like to point out that the first part of this session will be a presentation about the right to access to environmental information by Andrea Sanoes, who is a representative of the public representative of the Escazu Agreement from Chile. The second part of our session will be breakout groups in order to workshop about developments on access to environmental information in different countries. These workshops will be attended by representatives from several countries so that we can present at the end in a general forum what the development of the agreement has been in each of the signatory countries, as well as non-signatory countries. We will present the information and the Reforestamos team will present the findings further down the road. So now we will continue to the first part of our session by giving a welcome to our presenter, Ms. Andrea Sanoes. Andrea is a social worker and a political scientist from Chile who has worked on local, regional, and international level on themes of transparency, governance, open governance, and citizen participation. She is a public representative of the Escazu Agreement. Andrea, welcome. We give you the floor so you can share all the information.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. This initiative is fantastic, Escazu Thursdays, so we can talk about different articles that this document has. I know that you have a workshop after this. So this is information for you to think about what is going on in your countries and the main challenges that we have to cover in each country country. Some countries, as we know, have already ratified this treaty. My country is not one of them, sadly. Hopefully, in the new administration that we'll have from March next year on, we can adhere to this document as soon as possible. I also want to say that the first COP about the Escazu agreement will be in November 2022. The first tasks of each country will be to define what do we have as a country and what do we have as Escazu, and tackle the challenges so the countries can comply with the dispositions of the Escazu agreement. There are some countries that have more than what Escazu states. There are some others that don't. Maybe some countries will need some changes in the public policies.
Tiene que cambiar y lo que tiene que crear para poder cumplir con Escazú. Así que bueno, espero que esta presentación les sirva en esa línea, ¿cierto? Entonces, bueno, el acceso a la información, el concepto de democracia ambiental, que me imagino que muchos de ustedes conocen, se refiere a este principio 10, ¿cierto? Escazú se basa en este principio 10, que nace en la cumbre del 92 y que habla de que la mejor forma de abordar los asuntos ambientales es con la participación de todos y todas, y para ello se requiere información y también poder tener acceso a la justicia a través de la vía administrativa o del poder judicial. Y democracia ambiental engloba estos tres derechos: el derecho de acceso a la información, a la participación y a la justicia. Eso es democracia ambiental, que podemos decir que es un sinónimo del principio 10. Y otra forma que también se habla sobre los derechos de acceso, porque es acceso a la información, acceso a participación y justicia, que también equivale o corresponde al concepto de democracia ambiental. Y lo que hace Escazú, ¿cierto?, es crear un convenio con mejores estándares para nuestra región respecto de la democracia ambiental. Eso es el objetivo de Escazú. Este es el índice de la presentación que preparé. Quiero mostrarles cuál es la estructura del acuerdo, qué es información pública ambiental, porque es importante, las principales disposiciones que hoy día tiene Escazú, y brevemente hacer una situación general y los desafíos que enfrentamos en América Latina, muy a suerte de titulares, pero también temas que no me cabe duda que ustedes conocen en sus países y desafortunadamente también viven estos problemas. Bueno, esta es la estructura del convenio. Tiene una primera parte, como ustedes pueden ver ahí, y al medio está lo que se llama la parte operativa. Por lo tanto, hay dos artículos sobre acceso a la información, el 5 y el 6. Hay uno sobre participación, uno sobre acceso a la justicia y otro que es el nuevo y que es un gran avance, ¿cierto?, del convenio, de tener un articulado para los defensores de derechos humanos en asuntos ambientales, conocidos como los defensores ambientales, los defensores de la tierra. Luego, muy interesante, tiene un artículo 10 y 11 sobre fortalecimiento de capacidades y cooperación y un centro de intercambio. El convenio reconoce que para poder avanzar en la efectiva implementación de estos derechos se requiere fortalecer las capacidades, tanto del Estado, de sus funcionarios y funcionarias, como de la sociedad civil y de las comunidades locales. Entonces, por ejemplo, lo que ustedes están haciendo sin duda va fortaleciendo las capacidades, en este caso, ¿cierto?, organizaciones de la sociedad civil, que es lo que hemos hecho en todos los países para conocer el convenio, entender el convenio, ver las brechas en su país y poder hacer incidencia y abogar porque esos cambios se produzcan, y por supuesto en el futuro colaborar con el gobierno, quien sea, que le corresponde empezar a implementar eso, porque necesitamos la colaboración y la cooperación, por supuesto, si que el gobierno está dispuesto en esa línea. Sabemos que a veces eso es difícil de conseguir. Y luego, como cualquier convenio de carácter vinculante, ¿cierto?, tiene temas de recursos, reglas de procedimiento. Solo destacar que en materia de implementación, seguimiento y evaluación, que es otro artículo, el convenio crea un comité de seguimiento, es decir, va a haber un comité integrado por personas independientes que van a recibir los distintos informes periódicos que los estados van a tener que presentar, implementar, y algo muy interesante es que se va a crear un comité de cumplimiento donde cualquier persona, cualquiera de nosotros que estamos acá, si es que no fue mal, pedimos información. Por ejemplo, el Estado ratificó Escazú, no cumple con la disposición de Escazú, luego de haber utilizado los mecanismos nacionales, yo tengo la posibilidad, cualquier persona natural, a llegar a este comité de seguimiento en el convenio y poner su caso.
If I want to get to this committee, I have
Luego verás ese caso
the
de
opportunity to do so as a natural, normal person. It's a very good way to support citizenship and put pressure on the states so they can comply with this.
Generar información sobre el medio
There are
ambiente.
two central themes on public information. The first is to generate the information about environmental issues. Unfortunately, our countries face very serious challenges when it comes to generating information on environmental topics. There is a lot of irregularity in the region. There are countries with more information and others with much less, but it is a common challenge for most countries in Latin America. Here, I will specify the type of information that Escazu mentions, and it is very important for you to understand whether your countries have this kind of information or not. There's also the possibility of accessing, for citizens to access public information, and that's why we have laws of public access to information, as well as environmental laws. These two legal frameworks in our region define how the citizenship can access the information, the public information, the time frames, the reservation causes, etc. So on the one side, we have the generation of information, and on the other, we have the possibility of accessing that information. Now, what is environmental information? The answer is not that obvious, and there's a lot of debate around this issue. Forgive me, but I did not put the source on this slide, but it is in another slide. Here's a definition of what environmental information is. And I highly recommend the text that I will link here that has a definition that I used to prepare this presentation. And it has a lot of information on each region and each one of the articles of Escazu. So if you want to learn more about it, I really highly recommend that you read the publication from CEPAL that talks about the rights as defined in the Escazu Agreement. There is a link between the 3030 agenda and the Escazu Agreement. We could say in very wide terms, and maybe it's an oversimplification, but Escazu, it can be said, is a tool, an essential tool for the implementation of the 3030 agenda, because it is a diagonal tool that can cut across many issues, from recycling to climate change to pollution, or any instrument that takes on an environmental theme should be put through the lens of the Escazu Agreement. Whether it be air pollution, for example, in our common space, if there's a plan about decontamination, we have the right to access the information about that plan based on the right to access. And I can tell you there's a great barrier in terms of technical language, but we have a right to that information and a right to take part in the decisions around that plan. So Escazu is a tangential tool that can be used across many themes, and it can be implemented on any instrument, on any framework that has to do with environmental issues. So what is the definition of environmental information? I'm not going to read it, but you can see it there. Just give me some examples that if there is a negative impact on health and the environment, in that sense, there's a direct relationship, for example, between the pandemic and Escazu, because we will see that there is an article that says the states must guarantee. Sadly, not the entire agreement uses that language to guarantee, because it's more binding and puts governments in a position to really have to guarantee. Unfortunately, not all the articles talk about that. But in this case, it says that the government must guarantee that the population will know immediately and through many different media what the imminent threat is to their health. They have the access to that information so that the population can take the steps they need. So this has a lot to do with a pandemic, and it has a lot to do with climate change, because we know that that brings flooding and drought and fires, etc., and they are an imminent threat to public health, without a doubt, and also to the environment. So just 3 or 4 ideas on why environmental information is important. Obviously, there are many more reasons, but I wanted to focus on the public health aspect, from the perspective of the citizenry. What is it that we work on? So it obviously allows for communities in their territory and also populations of urban centers to have the information that we can use to see the situation in our region in terms of natural resources that we want to protect or take care of. Also, that we can defend and take the measures we need if we have the right information on the environmental issues. For example, I've worked extensively in Chile on what are called sacrificial zones, which is a terribly unfortunate name, but they are regions of the countries. We have 6 regions. For example, one near the ocean where thermoelectric plants were built. These have to be close to the coast, of course, because they use the water. But these zones are highly polluted from the air pollution and the marine resources. It generates a lot of poverty, a lot of health issues. It's really a vicious cycle, a terrible vicious cycle. So there is a very important struggle, for example, to close some of these thermoelectric plants. The information about these sacrificial zones is very important, that it be transparently accessible, because, for example, the air pollution has brought very serious consequences, health consequences to the population. And it is very important for the population to have access to that information.
O sea, el derecho de las
There are
personas
many international agreements about the right to know, the right to people to understand information, to also be able to decide where they're going to live, and following the line of sacrifices makes lots of sense in this point. It also prevents corruption in decision making in big projects such as thermoelectric, everything that is related to energy, displacing people from mining. Chile is a mining country, and the mining sector has growth increasingly in Central America. So there are many challenges that these communities are facing. If I have environmental information that I can understand, if I have the capacities, I can follow up with this. In all of our countries, many times the approval of projects with big impacts to the environment and the people, these processes are not transparent. Citizenship doesn't have access to this, and that, of course, is related to corruption. It also allows us to spread awareness and educate citizenship about the protection of the environment. We see campaigns about taking care of the water, why it is important. We talk about the truth, what the governments are doing, etc. As we said, we have 2 articles in Escazu that refer to environmental information. There you have the titles, and there's a summary. Article 5 is related to the legal framework of public information and access to information. And Article 6 is related to the generation and spread of this environmental information. So if you have access to this kind of information, you can get to the laws of access to information. There are some countries that comply with what Escazu said, and there are also some countries that do not comply, such as countries in the Caribbean that still don't have information about this environmental disposition, and that, of course, must be improved once they implement Escazu. So these two are the two topics, the big topics of these articles. I'm not going to read all of this, but you can see here the short names of each article. Here we're reading the Article 5, so it's related to timelines, deadlines, how and where to comply if you don't get the information, etc. Article 6 is related to generation and divulgation of information. I'm not going to read once again, but I'm going to mention some topics. If you read the article in detail, you'll get more information, of course. Our region has progressed a lot in this, but we still need to do a lot more. We can combine the data, we can reproduce the data. There are some international databases about this information system, the environmental information system. There are some agencies that only exist in Chile and Mexico. Maybe some countries in the Caribbean are progressing with pollution, information about pollution. We must know who is polluting the environment and how. Topics 6 and 7, we talk of format and language. And this is really important. A big barrier in the region, also in Chile, is that environmental
Tienes una amenaza con un
information, we
proyecto.
cannot understand it. It's completely technical. And when we have a project that is a challenge for health, imagine the difficult situation that this brings. People that talk another language in the country, that are part of vulnerable groups, that don't live in urban areas or that are facing poverty, is even more difficult to access to this information. We are currently investigating, researching about this. It's incredible. There are 16 cases from 8 different countries, and the main root of an environmental country that we know that this region has lots of them, it's the impossibility of understanding the information. They don't receive any help from the state to understand this information. There are some NGOs that work with this. But this is the main cause of environmental conflicts. They get to the justice system to comply, and the conflict begins. With this, I want to emphasize the importance of understanding the environmental information. Then we have the topic of documenting access to environmental information from private sector. I don't know if you know, but in Chile and in different countries, the private sector has more capacity to develop environmental information than the state. So companies have in their hands more information than the government. If we are a company and we want to imply a mining project, we need lots of information. And how can we do so? The whole population can get this information. Then we have sustainability reports that in some countries exist. And many people think, including me, that this is really weak.
Pero sin duda los invito a lo que hagan.
Article 6 needs to be done case by case. It's an analysis of the law in each country. Now, I'm not going to read this whole slide, but when we're talking about an environmental information system, which a lot of our countries have, this is the kind of information that that system should have, the environmental information systems. You can see that they're based on international agreements that the countries are signatories to, and also has to do with the administrative sanctions that might have been imposed on different public institutions on environmental themes. Sources of climate change, for example. It's very important that the processes of environmental information are not very transparent. So it's very important that private sector be held to account on the information they are providing and how they are going to compensate their impacts. Another key theme on the has to do with the register and transfer of pollutants, as I have mentioned. This
de capacitación de las Naciones, sí, de las Naciones Unidas, no sé si estoy bien, me parece que sí, ha hecho un esfuerzo importante de avanzar en los REC en América Central.
Has a lot of information done to address the efforts and the challenges in Central America, and there's been some advance, some progress on the different countries. And now the midterm goal is that all Latin American countries have this type of register. I also wanted to talk about the, as I already mentioned, the threats to public health. Environmental threats to public health exist in every country. As I have talked about Chile, the 6 sacrificial zones, there is a direct relationship between pollution and human health, obviously. Now, to start wrapping things up, the situation generally in Latin America, I'd have to point out that the
humano, no lo dije antes, pero es un derecho humano, ¿cierto? Que está consagrado en la Carta Universal de los Derechos Humanos del año 48 de las Naciones Unidas. En la mayoría de nuestros países está en rango constitucional, que es muy bueno, que esté en la Constitución, porque ahí se derivan las leyes que corresponden. Luego,
in their constitution, enshrined in their constitution, which is a very good thing. They have laws around this. Now, in 22 countries, we have laws that safeguard the access and the public access to information, and whether it be public environmental information, and they have a definition within their legislation of what this information might be. It has to be a broad definition, obviously, for it to be useful. So it is a very political decision. Each country makes a political decision on their definition of public or environmental information. Now, here's the name of the publication on the bottom of the slide. You can see it here again. The publication on access to information. Now, the Inter-American judicial system talks about the right to access to information. In general, this right is distributed or enshrined in the laws about information specifically, and also in the legal mechanisms around environmental legislation. So here in Article 5 and 6 of the agreement, you can see that it talks about the information on the one hand and environmental legislation on the other. The laws to access environmental information establish the bare minimum of what the definition might be. Generally speaking, all of our laws have something called active transparency, which is the obligation that the state has to publish the information on their websites and several medium. It's called active transparency because the state must take action to make information available. This is why it is an active transparency. It requires action on the part of the state. Passive transparency is when the state waits for a request, a letter requesting information, for example. This is a passive transparency. Active means that they have to take the actions necessary to publish the information on diverse media. And here you can see what these legislations have in them in terms of environmental legislation and interaction with society and the different political actions. Now, with regards to Latin America, I want to point out that there are serious barriers to vulnerable minorities. Now, there is a mandate in Escazu to make a special effort to guarantee access to vulnerable groups, access to information. There's a special emphasis on vulnerable groups. Now, if we do not ensure this and take some real steps in this direction, we're not going to achieve what Escazu is trying to achieve, which is effective implementation of these rights. So any kind of work that you're doing, I would invite you to always try to identify what the groups are that are in a vulnerable situation and make sure you're trying to get them the right information. For example, figure out what might be of interest to them, which is very hard because sometimes they speak a different language or they don't have access to internet or there are physical barriers. So there has to be an extra effort made because there's large segments of the population. We're not necessarily speaking about just the minority. We're talking about important segments of the population who are in disadvantaged situations, whether it be through poverty, different language, or just different living situations. In the case of Chile, 40%, that's 2 million people that do not have the ability to cover their bare living necessities. And of those millions, 40% does not even have access to daily nutrition. So even 2 or 3 years ago, that was not true in Chile. We had poverty, but not to this level. So now this group is in a much more disadvantaged situation.
Países son los conflictos socioambientales, ¿cierto?
Lastly, I'll talk about something that is really present in our countries, unfortunately. I'm going to talk about environmental conflicts. This is information from Global Witness. I invite you to check these reports. Maybe you already know them, but they are really good at giving information about the different countries. Latin America is the region where more people are murdered. The most dangerous countries are Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, unfortunately. And this is a contradiction of the use of a territory and their natural resources. Communities want to take care of these resources and they reject these big projects that aren't transparent, and it's difficult to know the impacts. And even if we know the impacts, it's really difficult to know how to tackle this. Chile has near 200 conflicts of this kind. There are some countries that have an ombudsperson that is the one in charge of doing the registry of this. In terms of environmental defenders, there's a lot of work to do. That's not the topic that we're covering today, but there are lots of countries that still don't have a registry of those people, those environmental defenders. There are some countries that have laws regarding this, but they don't comply. They don't get to the objective. So this is the last thing from me. Thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful for all of you. Andrea, thank you very much for doing this topic that is so broad. You did it a very good summary, and it was very understandable. So thank you very much from all of us who are in this process. As you mentioned, any instrument that we need to implement in terms of the environmental framework, we have to do it under the light of the Escazu Agreement. And not only about information, we need clear and understandable information, information that people can use later. There are some questions here. Andrea's presentation, all of this is being recorded and is going to be shared with all of you. We also have a question from one of the representatives, and this question says, the countries that already have a lay of access to information, do they need to modify it in the case, for example, of Guatemala? That people use this as an excuse to not ratify the agreement. Yes, some countries will have to do modifications in the legal framework. Every agreement that is binding must have something that is called an implementation guideline. And this implies how to interpret each one of these articles. Because as we know, laws can be interpreted. So this is looking for a broad interpretation. And this can mean that a country changes a law. There are some countries that can comply that there are so many changes they might do that makes this process very difficult. And on the contrary, they can also say that what they have is enough. In the case of Chile, one of the arguments of the government is that Chile has everything, so they didn't have to ratify Escazu. So we were saying, if we have it all, why don't we ratify it? But it's not like that. We don't have it all, of course. Authorities can use the same argument in both ways. We have everything, so we don't need to ratify it, or we don't have anything, and it's a lot of work, so we don't have to ratify it. We first maybe can change the laws and so on and so forth. Escazu looks for strengthening capacities, looks for funds to fund this in the different countries. So every country that is supported by the ACLAC needs to go in this process because they will have support, they will have technical assistance, they will have the opportunity to do a dialogue with different representatives from different countries. But of course, it can be a different discussion. It can be against or in favor. We have another question, Andrea. Is that if you have information about the different initiatives regarding environmental information?
Yes, this has happened at the national level, without a doubt. It is an initiative that is worthy of identifying with and taking part in. So those countries that are subscribed or have signed on to this Haiti agreement, where there's a coordination between organizations of civil society, such as Peru, for example, is a good example. So they have these two agreements, both Haiti and Escazu, and there has been some effort towards synergy. However, in each country, we need to link Escazu with the other initiatives or legal frameworks that the country has. For example, one important mechanism is the Alliance for Open Governance, that you may know of it. It's looking for governments to improve. So we're looking to take action on these things moving forward. We're really making an effort so that countries incorporate commitments about implementation of Escazu. So there needs to be a review and evaluation that pushes governments to meet their agreements. So the Open Governance Initiative is a great example of a mechanism that can be used. So look at what's being used in your country and what's happening to see what synergies can be used to help implement Escazu. Very well, thank you very much, Andrea. So now we're going to go with the last question. Let's see if you can help us with that. On the case of communities who have difficult access to official information, how can the agreement, or how does the agreement foresee that it can help with this situation? Well, there are several dispositions in Article 6 and in Article 7, which is about citizen participation, that says the state must attend or give preference to groups that are vulnerable so that they can understand the information. So that means they have to have the information in more than one language. And there are some very specific provisions that say that the state must take some action so that the access to information is guaranteed. Unfortunately, this does not use the language that they must guarantee. It's a much softer language, so it's open to interpretation. It says they need to promote it, for example, and the government can do anything and say that they're promoting without actually guaranteeing access. So, there are several examples, but the language is important. Andrea, I think that we have been very well informed today, and we have some clarity around what the need is to promote these articles that are in Escazu, and that these initiatives, these conversations that we are having are very necessary, because the information is not useful if we don't use it. So we're very grateful to your attendance today. And if you could please share your contact information. Of course. Also, Cesarina, they're in the presentation, but I'm also going to leave my email. And I would love to collaborate if you want to do something with a local community. In Chile, we're working with Mapuche communities and communities in the sacrificial zone. So really, here's my email, and count on me. I'd love to collaborate. Thank you very much. So there's the email, and we're going to distribute the presentation also. There's my email. Thank you. Thank you, and good luck. Have a very productive work session. Thank you. Thank you very much.